everybody. You know, what's funny is I'm here to give a talk on imposter syndrome, and my own imposter syndrome is telling me I shouldn't be up here right now. So I'm just going to set that inner critic aside for a little bit. I'm going to invite everybody to just close your eyes if you feel comfortable for about 30 seconds, and just try to visualize a time recently in which you felt inadequate. So maybe you attributed your success to luck. Maybe you felt like everybody else was so much smarter than you. Maybe you overworked yourself to kind of manage these feelings. And then whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. So my first experience with imposter syndrome was in college. I was always a good student, so I went to a pretty prestigious university. And I remember junior year of college, my roommate asked me to proofread one of her papers. And I kid you not, like half the words in there, I didn't even know what they meant. And this wave of self-doubt came over me, and I felt like such an imposter. I felt like I didn't belong at that school, and that was really the first time my imposter syndrome showed up. So imposter syndrome affects roughly 70% of people at least once. So I think we can all kind of relate in that sense. It disproportionately affects high achievers, and it's important to note that it's not a clinical diagnosis, but rather an internal psychological experience of self-doubt. So people who struggle with imposter syndrome, they have a really hard time internalizing their accomplishments. Even if there's external evidence that they are successful, they really experience a lot of self-doubt and sort of attribute their success to things outside of themselves. There's some mixed research on whether women experience imposter syndrome more than men, but since this is a female empowerment event, we're gonna kind of go with that idea. So women tend to be less self-assured, and we let self-doubt limit us a lot more than men do. And we have this sort of emotional tug of war between being professionals and parents, for those of you who are parents, where we never really feel like we're doing a good job at either role, right? Men, when they experience imposter syndrome, they typically avoid things that are going to elicit that in them, whereas women, we work harder. So that just sort of perpetuates this idea that we need to overwork in order to accomplish, and that it's our own internal self-worth that kind of comes into question at that point. I remember the first, as Daphne mentioned, I'm a psychology professor, and I remember the first time that I stood in front of my first class, and I was just terrified. You know, I was thinking, sure, I learned all of this stuff back when I was in school, but I'm not an expert. What if the students asked me a question and I didn't know the answer to it? And as I went and got positive feedback, I really realized that this was my own imposter syndrome acting up again. So why does imposter syndrome develop? There's a lot of reasons why, but just for the sake of brevity, I'm going to focus on three, and that is family of origin, society, and biology. So starting with family of origin, which is really just the family in which we were raised, you know, there are some more obvious family dynamics that we would assume might contribute to low self-worth or self-doubt or imposter syndrome. Those would include, you know, having maybe an alcoholic or narcissistic parent, being a victim of physical or verbal abuse, things like that. But there are also plenty of people who grew up in seemingly healthy family environments who also experience imposter syndrome, right? And as I mentioned before, it disproportionately affects high achievers and people who grew up in a very achievement-focused family. And so that is why we often see it with people who are highly successful, right? It doesn't discriminate. So that said, there are also some more subtle family dynamics that can contribute. One is if you grew up in a family in which you were kind of known as being the smart one, then things kind of came easily to you. And so if something didn't come easily, you might interpret that as you not being competent or you not being intelligent enough, and imposter syndrome kind of was bred from there. You may have also been the hard worker in your family, and so you sort of internalize this idea that you have to work really, really hard in order to accomplish things. And again, it's not because of you and your abilities and your self-worth, it's because of all of this hard work and dedication. That's how we, burn ourselves out and just kind of overwork ourselves, and we're in this very success-driven society, right? So this is a very easy thing to do. Another option would be if you had a sibling who was considered the smart one. So you may have been more of the sensitive one or the one with more social emotional skills, and so you might attribute your success to your social skills and not your competence. Another option would be, people who grew up in what we would consider a healthy environment, but maybe your chosen profession is one that invites a lot of critique. So for example, artists, their work is constantly being critiqued, and that can develop into imposter syndrome as well. Next is socialization. So we live in a very individualistic society, right? The US is individualistic. We focus on achievement and individual success, whereas a lot of other countries are more collectivistic. Their success is of the group, not of the individual. And as women, when we're little girls, we tend to get praised for being good, right? And what does good mean when we're little girls? It means being neat and well socialized and kind of quiet and following the rules. So then when we get into adulthood and the demands to be successful shift a little bit, we're sort of in this identity crisis, right? We've been praised for being the good girl, and so a lot of our worth is dependent on that praise. And so then our accomplishments kind of become how we identify our self-worth, right? So we have to be really careful in adulthood to really own those accomplishments and not have them be sort of the way we get approval or confidence or self-worth. In terms of socialization, there's something called attribution theory, which is where it's really just a mental framework of how we make sense of things, right? So some things we can attribute to ourselves and our own hard work, and other times we attribute things to external sources. So if you do have an accomplishment and you attribute it to knowing somebody or nepotism or your social skills or whatnot, you're externalizing that success, right? You're attributing that to something outside of yourself, and it just kind of feeds that narrative. There's also something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and this is when novices, people who are new to something, they experience less imposter syndrome because they are quickly progressing through the learning curve, whereas people who are considered more experts, they actually realize what they don't know, and so imposter syndrome shows up a lot more for those folks. Again, we're looking at our high achievers and people who are pretty successful in life. Imposter syndrome can also really affect marginalized communities. So this can include race, religion, sexual orientation, immigration status, and these folks may have concerns over just kind of feeling like they don't belong in general, feeling like an imposter in general. And so you add this other layer of self-doubt, and it makes it really hard to cope with imposter syndrome. Their accomplishments might be minimized, or They might be over or underutilized depending on what, let's say, a company needs from them. So that's just something to be aware of as well. And then in terms of biology, women are sort of primed, our brains are primed to focus on negative emotional stimuli and to retain memories of negative events. And so we have to be really careful about being intentional about seeking out the positive, right? And I hate to say it, but hormones also play a role in imposter syndrome. You know, we are wired for connection, observation, collaboration, and this can make it really hard to take risks and develop confidence in certain areas. And even though we are wired for this connection and collaboration over competition, we still find ourselves playing that comparison game a lot, right? So as Daphne mentioned, I've been a therapist for over 15 years, and I'll still find myself in session with a client and being like, man, you should really see a therapist. And then I'm like, wait, I am their therapist. And so I'm like, why am I discrediting all of my education and experience because I feel stuck in that moment, you know? And so I really have to be cognizant of that and sort of work with my inner critic and quiet that down when I'm having that experience. So I just wanted to share a few ways to overcome imposter syndrome, right? And for starters, we just kind of have to look at what it's comprised of. So the four main components are going to be anxiety, perfectionism, self-doubt, and a fear of failure, right? And, you know, when we experience these things, there's just so much negative self-talk and limiting beliefs that go on internally that we really need to, again, be intentional about sort of challenging those. Because how many times have you been your worst critic, right? How many times have you talked to yourself in a way that you would never dream of talking to a friend or a family member? And just, you know, that negative self-talk is that voice in your head that constantly berates you or puts you down or tells you you're worthless or that you can't do something. That might be your own voice. It might be somebody else's voice, you know, from when you were a kid. So the first step is just having awareness of these four components and realizing that we need to take more of a growth mindset. I don't know if you're familiar with Carol Dweck. She's a psychologist who focuses on a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And in a growth mindset, we see ourselves as being capable of learning new things and making mistakes and facing challenges in order to grow. Whereas a lot of people with imposter syndrome have more of a fixed mindset, more of a performance mindset, where we think that our abilities are innate and it's so therefore any mistakes or perceived inadequacies are also unchanging. So we really have to be careful about not having that fixed mindset and understanding that failure is good. It's, you know, it allows us to develop resiliency. It allows us to learn new things. But we often, if we have imposter syndrome, we often spend so much time avoiding perceived failure that we're really self-sabotaging and setting ourselves up for disappointment. You know, in all my years of being a therapist, disappointment is the one emotion that people try to avoid the most. And it's just impossible. So we have to sort of accept it, embrace it, and realize that it's a normal human experience. And you know, we're all human. We all make mistakes. Mistakes allow us to be vulnerable, and vulnerability is what leads to meaningful connections, right? So like I said, ways to overcome imposter syndrome. First is reframing that negative self-talk and having more compassion for yourself. So when you are aware of this little voice inside your head that is putting you down, you can actually write out those thoughts and then try to provide evidence to the contrary and show yourself some kindness and grace. So for example, let's say you had a big presentation at work and you feel like you totally bombed it, right? And you're just feeling awful. Go back and pull out the things that you did well. Pull out the positive feedback you received from people. And then just show yourself some grace for mistakes. You know, nobody's perfect as much as we might strive to be. And like I said, you know, mistakes allow us to grow. You also want to identify your inner critic and give it a name and personality. This helps to sort of externalize it a little bit, and then you can almost like talk to it as though it's another person when it shows up, because it inevitably will. So for example, take negative Nancy. You know, she's walking around with this clipboard with all of your perceived insecurities and just following you around like that nosy neighbor who's telling you everything you're doing wrong, all while sipping lukewarm coffee. You know, personify that inner critic. The other thing is to practice the 70-20-10 rule. This says that 70% of your work is going to be average, 20% is going to be subpar, and 10% is going to be amazing. Oftentimes, we focus too much on that 10% that we try to avoid failure, and so we don't put the work in that we need to in order to see success, in order to see things moving in the direction we want them to be. Another one is just to stop the comparison game, right? I think we all compare ourselves to other people so much, and the only person we should be comparing ourselves to is ourselves. And we want to assume this gain mindset. So a lot of times we take where we are and where we want to be and we see the gap, right? But if we take where we are and look at where we're coming from, we see the gain. We see what we've actually accomplished. The point is that you just really need to embrace the fact that you have this vulnerability, that you're going to make mistakes, that other people, 7 out of 10 people in the room are also experiencing this imposter syndrome. And just show yourself some grace and have some kindness. And I want to end with just another little reflection. So if I can invite you to close your eyes again and just conjure up an image of yourself when you were 5 or 6 years old. And think about what that little kid needs to hear. Maybe it's that you have worth just the way you are. Or maybe it's that you deserve patience and kindness to yourself. Or maybe it's that mistakes are okay and they're vital to the learning process. And every time your imposter syndrome pops up, just talk to that little kid and give that little kid whatever she needs and affirm those beliefs. And the more that you can be intentional about celebrating your successes, because like I said, our brains are often drawn to the negative, right? So we have to be very intentional about celebrating our successes. And what that does is if we do it consistently, it actually rewires our brain pathways. It's called neuroplasticity, and we can literally change the structure of our brains if we are caught in this negative thinking cycle, right? I like to think of it as if you envision, for those of you who have been skiing or sledding, which we live in Chicago, so that's probably everybody, envision it as like your negative thoughts are a sled that has created such a deep divot in the hill, and that every time you are intentional about celebrating your success or saying something positive about yourself, you're putting a new sprinkling of snow until eventually that divot is going to fill up and you have a completely beautiful landscape that you can create whatever beliefs you want to about yourself. So I I provided you with some helpful info and a few practical tips to take with you. If you need to do a deeper dive, I'm available for one-on-one sessions, and I hope y'all have a great evening.